What does it cost for a loaf of bread in Zimbabwe, the hyperinflation capital of the planet? Well, in 2008, as we mentioned, the price of a loaf of bread there was 35 million Zimbabwean dollars. Our next guest is the noted Wall Street investor Marc Faber, and he's concerned America could be headed towards a hyperinflation nightmare of its own. He joins us now from Zurich, the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. Marc Faber, always wonderful to have you with us, sir. And you've caught a lot of people's attention, I know, talking about the real risk of hyperinflation in the United States. First, could you define what hyperinflation would be? It's not necessarily 17,000%, right?
Yes, I think, say 100% per annum would already qualify as hyperinflation, because if it's every year, then obviously the purchasing power of money depreciates very quickly.
So what would put the United States in a situation like that? I mean, most people hear that and think, oh, that must just be impossible. This is the United States.
Well, let's break down the economic history of the U.S. in two periods. The first period, 1800 to 1913, when the price level was stable and actually moderately falling. We had a deflationary boom. The U.S. had 4 million inhabitants in 1800, and in 1910 it had 90 million people. We had the entire industrialization of the United States, the construction of the railroads, the canals, electricity, the first cars, first airplanes, and so forth, under a stable price level. Then the introduction of the Federal Reserve in 1913, and since then the US dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power. We already had a lot of inflation, and if this time it took 100 years to lose 95%, I think the next 95% loss in purchasing power will be very quickly.
So there's two follow-ups to that. One, very quickly. What is very quickly, and what sort of inflation are you talking about?
Well, let's put it this way. In every society, when you have large fiscal deficits combined with easy monetary policies, that was the case in Latin America after the petrodollar crisis of 1981, the likelihood that you will have high inflation is very, very high. And it happens relatively quickly. Say, if you look at the German hyperinflation, 1919 to 1923, it happened within 4 years. I'm not sure it will happen within 4 years in the US, but I could easily see rates of inflation, if they're measured properly, that we have to add, because the government now is understating the true rate of inflation massively. It's a lie what they publish, and to structure your monetary policy according to core inflation is another total misconception. So I think within 5 to 10 years' time we could have inflation rates of 10 to 20% in the US.
5 to 10 years' time, 10 to 20%. When you say the inflation is a lie on core, are you saying we should be looking at headline inflation, which does include those volatile food and fuel, or are you saying we should be using another number that might be even higher than headline?
Yes, even higher, because you would have to weight the CPI. The CPI, essentially Consumer Price Index, is a basket of different goods and services. And if you underweight educational costs and if you underweight healthcare costs, then you come to a totally different result than if you would weight them properly. And before on your station, there was just someone that said the insurance costs were rising at 9% annual rate.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you underweight these things, then obviously you get different results.
That's a fair point, and I think something we should have many more conversations about. Two follow-ups for you, though. One, in this world, Marc Faber, where we could see in the next 5 to 10 years 10 to 20% inflation in the U.S., would there be anywhere in the world to hide, or is that, in a sense, a death knell to the global economy?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, other countries will also inflate. And I mean, the whole discussion of low inflation in the US in the last 10 years, what is frequently and conveniently overlooked is that as a result of the US current account deficit slushing $800 billion into the world annually, we had very high price increases in emerging economies. I was recently traveling in some emerging economies. I can tell you the price level today is actually much, much higher than, say, 10 years ago. And I would also argue that the place to hide is probably more in equities and in assets. I'm not very bullish about real estate prices in the US, but I'd rather be in real estate than in 30-year US government bonds.
All right, well, Marc Faber, thank you very much for the food for thought. I think it's going to get a lot of people thinking in the trades. We appreciate it. Have a nice weekend, sir.